How do we discern truth from lies, fiction from propaganda? For Ray McGinnis, it started with a gut feeling, a sense that what he was being told by the media and the government was not right. But he didn't just follow his instincts, he used them to investigate further. When the Emergencies Act was invoked in Canada on this 14th day of February 2022, the country crossed a line that has altered the course of our young history. The government took an extreme measure that was subsequently found to be illegal, and yet there has been no accountability, no repercussions for the guilty. But the bigger challenge we face may be the fact that much of the Canadian public has yet to understand what happened here. What happened to our rights? Why did regular journalists fail to do their jobs? And what does it all mean for each of us and for democracy itself when the people are lied to? Ray McGinnis set out to discover the truth during this dark chapter and wrote a book that meticulously lays out the facts of the end days of the Freedom Convoy. Unjustified, the Freedom Convoy, the Emergencies Act, and the inquiry that got it wrong is that book. And its author is my guest today on the season 2 premiere of Trued Up. So, first, Ray, I'm so looking forward to speaking with you after having received 2 of your books and read a little bit about you and finding out that we have many things in common. But first of all, I just have to say, I absolutely love that painting behind you. Where did that come from? Who did that?
It's an artist named Leo Santana. So he's it's pretty wonderful, and does all kinds of expressionistic. I guess I don't know exactly how to describe it. But anyway, it's almost like a dream. This sort of
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have a strong connection to the arts.
Yes. Well, I have a great appreciation for visual art, but although my own personal expression has been more through, writing poetry, playing guitar, those kind of things, but not professionally playing guitar, but part of a folk song circle or something like that.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Well, I want to really start with that, how you came from, writing poetry, study, religious studies, combining the sacred with poetry to writing, at this point, the definitive book about what happened with the Emergencies Act. How did you make that journey? What was that path?
Okay. So the journey. I was raised in the United Church of Canada for the most part, and times worshiping in the Anglican Church, and I studied at the Center for Christian Studies. My mother had always wanted to become a deaconess, but she never did. She ended up teaching public school before she raised my brother and I. So I knew about this place. So I went off to I took an undergraduate Bachelor of Arts in Religious Studies with sort of a minor focus in political science, English literature, and history. And so I was for 18 years I was a Christian education director, and in various capacities I also coordinated large conferences across Canada for the United Church of Canada for youth and also for young adults. A lot of leadership development and inviting people to think about the world they were living in different conferences. So that was my focus. And then over the years, partly because the lived experience of working often in congregations or retreat settings in churches is that there's never enough time to do all the work. And you find that even though there's supposed to be a Sabbath, you're the one who's always working all the time. So I wanted to get off the squirrel cage wheel and to have a bit more of a rein in things so that I could have more control over the pace that I set for the work I was doing. And so I went to the Banff Center for Fine Arts and took some courses in poetry. I went to the place called the Center for Journal Therapy in Denver to learn about ways to use writing in a journal to help people in healthcare settings to write about their recovery from injury or illness, to help people in grief support groups write about their journey of grief and loss, to help people go for walks in nature trails and then stop and see what they were beholding, and then write poems using metaphors and similes, and also working at different centers to help seniors write snapshots of their memoirs for grandchildren often. And then I was also doing some work with some professional groups, getting lawyers to write in the right side of their brain and so on. So I worked for freelance for a couple of decades teaching writing workshops, and as I began to do that work, I was invited by a publisher that was hearing some great things about my writing workshops, and they said, would I like to write a book, which is a lovely way to begin as an author. I didn't have like an idea of what to write. I wasn't pounding the pavement, knocking on doors and getting rejections. I just got an invitation to write a book. So then I thought about what kind of book could I write that was going to be a brand new book. I was teaching mostly a lot of journal writing workshops, but on Amazon, I could see there were over 300 books about journal writing. And I thought, I don't think there's any kind of a niche I'm going to be able to write. But I thought, what if I write a book that helps people from, regardless of their spiritual background, to focus on the book of Psalms as a template, which is a common body of literature that is regarded highly by both the Jewish community, Christians, and Muslims, and then to invite people to look at the poetic devices in the Psalms to write their own new psalms or spiritual poems as they understand them in the 21st century. And so that's what evolved was then my book, Writing the Sacred. And so that's that was my journey. So I was carrying along, focusing on I wasn't writing about political things, and I have written 3 books. I wrote a second book, which is called Unanswered Questions: What the September 11th Families Asked and the 9/11 Commission Ignored, and that journey began because I knew where I was on September 11th in Joshua Tree National Park area in southeastern California, but I happened 6 years later to be in an airport in the States, and there was a book by Kristen Breitweiser, whose husband Ron had died in the South Tower, and her book, her memoir, was Wake Up Call: The Political Education of a 9/11 Widow, which was the story of how she became one of a dozen people representing tens of thousands of families that wanted the George W. Bush administration to have an investigation into the events of September 11th to make the nation safe. She had voted Republican, so this was not a group of Democrats that had it out for the president. And so I was really interested in that story, and as a memoir, in terms of personal writing, which is what I was doing a lot of memoir with people in my writing workshops. And I began to look at what the Family Steering Committee for the 9/11 Independent Commission was. And I looked at numbers of their questions and created some file folders in my computer of articles. And that just sat for over a decade. And then I thought in the mid 2010s, there were very few books focusing on the efforts of the families to have an investigation. And so I finally ended up writing a book, Unanswered Questions, telling the story about the families' efforts to have an investigation, more showing than telling. Because the dozen people on the Family Steering Committee regarding what the final report by the 9/11 Commission was in the summer of 2004, we're not all on the same page. Some are satisfied with the government's explanation, some think that there's a cover-up or a whitewash. So there are a variety of places, and I was more just showing the reader what unfolded and leaving them to make their own conclusions. So that was a book that came out in on the 20th anniversary of the attack, September 11th, in September of 2021. Now, at that point, we were well into the pandemic, and it was never my intention to start writing a series of books about commissions and public inquiries. However, in February of 2022, our Prime Minister invoked the Emergencies Act, and I had taken some political science courses about the War Measures Act back in 1970 when it was invoked by our Prime Minister's father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And I just had an intuition that there was something really off with this invocation on the 14th of February of 2022. It seemed like an overreaction. I didn't know all of why, but I ended up quickly writing an article within a week of the invocation. I had no background. I mean, I had no connections to the world of the media, journalism. I ended up finding a media platform in the States called Dissident Voice, who generally they publish quite liberal left pieces, but there I was. They accepted my article, and then that led to my just reading more. I could see from following people like Rupa Subramanya or Viva Fry or Anna Farrow from the Catholic Register in Montreal, who had been down on the protests, that there was a real disconnect between what I was hearing from the CBC, CTV, and other mainstream media, and then this alternate media on the ground perspective that was completely unrelated in terms of, so was this protest in Ottawa like Canada Day in the winter, or were there people there trying to overthrow the government and being violent, and were they all, instead of having Canadian flags, did they all have Nazi flags and so on? So I kept following different stories. I've been online on Twitter, now X, since the spring of 2021, because my publicist had wanted me to do that for my previous book. And if I hadn't been on that platform, I might not have come across a lot of things that I did. And so I would get to see a briefing from the Public Safety Committee for the House of Commons, hearing from interim police chief Steve Bell from the Ottawa Police Service that in fact, no, there were no weapons in the vehicles for the protesters in Ottawa, although it had been reported with all kinds of suggestions and rhetoric that the trucks in Ottawa were full of weapons. So there was all these different disconnects, and so I eventually decided when the Public Order Emergency Commission took place for 6 weeks in the fall of 2022 in Ottawa, that I would fly from Vancouver and go there and see for myself. And I sat for a week through the testimony of 14 witnesses. And then when the Public Order Emergency Commission report came out, I wrote a long piece on a website called Covert Action Magazine out of Washington, D.C. And that resulted in my suddenly being on about 8 different podcasts in Canada, the USA, and Europe. So, and then I had requests to write a book. So then that's what ended up happening with eventually Unjustified, the Freedom Convoy, the Emergencies Act, and the Inquiry That Got It Wrong. And along the way, I ended up having to, things kept changing, in real time. So I ended up happening to be being interviewed for a documentary when I was flown out to Ottawa, and I happened to go to several days of the trial of Tamara Litch and Chris Barber, and I also had to delay my manuscript's delivery to my publisher because all of a sudden Justice Richard Mosley came out with a decision that the government had acted unconstitutionally. So I couldn't just add 3 paragraphs at the end of one chapter and mention that in passing. I had to read the whole report, 200 pages, and write a whole chapter on that, and so on. So that's what's shifted me from being someone writing about more private, creative things to writing about politics. And I think too that in both the case of the of the Family Steering Committee for the 9/11 Independent Commission and the family's efforts to have an investigation. If there had been, and the book I've just written about the Public Order Emergency Commission and the Emergencies Act, if there had been, normally in normal times, there would be people who are A-list journalists who would have written books like I've written. And there would be no need for a citizen journalist like me. I would have just simply found the kind of books I've written in a bookstore and read them. But instead, what happened, given the journalists that normally do this kind of work going AWOL or ignoring the opportunity to write these kind of books, I ended up having to step up to the plate.
I said earlier, there's so many things that I connect with you around, so many things in common. One is that I went from teaching journaling to being a citizen journalist. So I understand this. Now, it's also interesting, and I think a lot of writers have this experience that you write what you want to read, right? Like you're filling the gap that the thing that you're looking for. For me, it was, I want accurate health information. That's where I started, because I was healing myself from chronic fatigue, and I just wanted accurate health information, which got me onto this particular trajectory. But it's interesting that the term citizen journalist has taken on so much more credibility in the last few years. I mean, reading your book, reading Unjustified, it has very high journalistic standards.
Thank you.
Thank you. Because I think, well, first of all, I'll just say up front that I think that it should be part of school curriculums, curriculums,
Yeah.
that the people who are learning about Canadian history should have to read that book, because we're in this situation where I think half of Canadians still think of it as an insurrection, and half know the truth about what happened. The people who think it was some kind of insurrection, it's like it's over, it doesn't matter, they don't think about it, they don't care about it. And then everybody else is recognizing the line that was crossed. What are your thoughts on, well, first of all, that situation? Or do you agree with that? Do you agree with that?
Oh yes, I agree. Let me just.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have deep concerns about having a society from coast to coast where we're working off very different understandings of what is going on in our country. I think that now, I mean, I understand that there can be media spin, and no doubt there's been half truths reported in the news probably throughout my whole lifetime and beforehand. However, my sense is that when the news was reported, when I was, back in the 60s, I mean, even on, if I went to the South and looked at the Vietnam War and the reporting of Walter Cronkite, well, certainly there was a curating of how to present the Vietnam War to the American public, but there was also, commentaries by Walter Cronkite that he had lost confidence in President Johnson and what was going on in Vietnam. And this is back in 1967. So you would have mainstream commentators discussing points of view that were off message from what a government might want them to say. I mean, you would have a CBC or a CTV reporter asking then Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau during the October crisis of 1970, how far are you going to go? And he said, just watch me. But, there would be that kind of, those kinds of hardball questions. But what we have now is a lot of softball questions. I mean, throughout the pandemic, fawning adoration and concern going only in the same direction all the time. So
What,
when
sorry, but what do you think caused that? Was that a slow bleed, or is that something? Do you think it had to do with the Trusted News Initiative? Is it a combination? How did we get here?
Yeah, certainly the Trusted News Initiative, which I guess came together around 2019, where they wanted to curate the news based on correct information and not disinformation and misinformation, uh, was a real turning point. But even before that, certainly in the States and in Canada, there's been a concentration of media ownership, and that's affected the kind of reporting. Um, there's been more caution on the part of reporters, and also even if you have a reporter that does a really great investigative piece, they can bring it ready for copy or to go to air on a news station, but you can have people who are in the editorial room vetoing things, tidying up the thing, or in private corporations, you can even have people who are representing the corporation who are not editors themselves that are saying, no, we're not going to run that story, or we're going to eliminate that part of the story. So there's a lot more of that that's been going on. Editorial uh, um, shortcuts to so that the sponsors, the advertisers, won't be upset with the news that's being reported.
Well, I was just going to say, it's amazing that people can watch something that literally says, brought to you by Pfizer, and not, have a little bit of discernment. But I mean, that's just how effective and pervasive the propaganda has been, that they're literally telling you the drug company is bringing you this news. This is from them, and people don't question it.
I think too. I mean, in Canada, there's been. I mean, there was a time many years ago that I even for a while gave donations to friends of the CBC.
So did
So
I.
and because back, I mean, I got raised on everything from Foster Hewitt doing Hockey Night in Canada and the Friendly Giant and Shaylin and all of that. And there was a pride. I think there's for many in my generation, I'm 67 years old. Many people had, grew up with real pride that, well, there are other countries in the world where they can't trust the news, but isn't it great in Canada that we can turn on the news and just relax and passively consume whatever we're being told because we know it's going to be fair and balanced, or fair and accurate. But those days have evaporated for us, where there's that's no longer the case. And so, although that's the place that I've come to, I know many people who still it's simply inconceivable to them,
Yeah.
having been raised on, turning on the CBC to watch the National and the Journal for decades and decades. It's inconceivable to them that reporting isn't the same as it was forever. That there could be any slant, any half truths, any flat out lies. There's no sense that there could ever be an agenda, uh, because that would mean that they couldn't trust the news that they've chosen to watch. And that means also that their worldview is going to be, upside down. And that's too much work. And I think it's, I mean, I have friends who've told me flat out that they're too lazy to want to bother to think that this could be the case. They just rather prefer to believe that whatever Rosemary Barton says must be, the truth with a capital T. So
I think you really hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, it really comes down to people are not willing to do the work of re-examining. I think we get to a certain age. I don't think it's that old. We get to a certain age where our opinions are our opinions, and our worldview is our worldview, and to completely upend that is threatening.
Yeah.
You know, I just, I wish. Do you think, let me ask it as a question, do you think there is a way, are we making progress with having people understand how the media actually works?
We're making some progress. I mean, a lot of people who are part of the alternative media are pointing out, whether it's someone like Glenn Greenwald or Trish Wood or whoever, that people Viva Fry who are pointing out that there's something wrong. I mean, Jim Ferguson in the UK. And so there's lots of people who are pointing out. They'll dig into a story and say, this is what the BBC said, but look at this, or they'll show like or they'll highlight. There's been a recent story in the Telegraph in the UK that before the vaccine rolled out in Britain, that the government there had already planned to expect to spend 1.7 billion pounds on vaccine injuries, a compensation. I mean, which they haven't yet by a long shot, because they're slow walking any kind of response to anyone reporting a vaccine injury. Nonetheless, it could give people pause to say, well, if the vaccine is so safe and effective, why would a government in Britain be planning to spend 1.7 billion pounds on
And
vaccine injuries?
right, and why would they roll out a vaccine that would require 1.7 billion pounds?
Yeah.
You know, to deal with the damage. Like, why would they do that?
Exactly. Why would they do that? So there, I mean, there's more opportunity to learn about off-message stories like that. I mean, and the Telegraph itself is a mainstream paper out of London, England, but it's still I think we're making some progress, but there are a lot of people in their silos who I think also a real impediment to having, well, conversations. I don't know that there's that many forums where there are real panel discussions, whether on TV stations, news panels. I don't know that the CBC is having a panel discussion with Dr. Teresa Tam and then a bunch of doctors like Ryan Cole in the States, or Dr. Mark Trotsy or whoever. Like, they're not having those kinds of
No,
discussions.
no.
So the narrow band of conversation is always about a safe place, which is effective in preventing people from being able to have a wider point of view about this. And I think as well, we've had the occurrence, the manifestation of the population of all kinds of little fact-checking organizations, so-called. I mean, we never had to fact-check what we thought about the Quebec referendum in 1995 or whatever. It was always just, here's some news, and here's a variety of points of view, and you make up your mind, general public. But now we have some people who are curated. I mean, people like Jim Smith, who's the head of Reuters, including Reuters fact checkers, who also happens to be on the board of directors for Pfizer. And lo and behold, Reuters fact checkers, whenever they're asked any question about the vaccines, they always come out 99.9% in favor of whatever the messaging is from the government, public health authorities, and the pharmaceutical company. So there's a real problem, because what I experience is that I have friends who treat the fact checking organizations as if it's like Moses has come down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, and there can be no disputing whatever a fact checker is concluding, even if different fact checking organizations don't even agree with each other. One fact checking organization will say, no, American hospitals are not being paid $13,000 US for every person who's admitted into hospital with COVID. And then USA Today fact checkers comes out and says, well, actually, that is the case. So, so you can have, if somebody, I'm not going to do this, but if somebody wanted to write a book about the incongruent 100% assertions by different fact checking organizations, you could have a field day with that.
That would be a great book, a fact-checking book on fact checkers. I mean, even the fact that these fact checkers came out of nowhere and nobody questions who they are. Who pays the fact checkers? It's not like there's some independent journalistic organization that is checking these things. These things are funded by people with a vested interest.
Yes, with vested interests, and for the most part, you have people coming out of college or university, mostly with a little background in computer technology, and I mean, generally, the people who are fact checking they're not physicians, they're not scientists, they're not journalists, but they're people who are probably in their first job, and they have a boss who's saying, this is the message that this is what you have to do in this article. This is the objective, which is to say, when the VAERS reporting system in the United States reports that 1.5 or 1.6 million people have reported an adverse reaction to the COVID-19 vaccine, what you're supposed to do is say that all of the people who are reporting, all 1.5 million people who are reporting this, are just anti-vaxxers. Now,
Yeah.
Don't dig into the story, fact checker, and say, well, the FDA and CDC, it is a criminal offense to fraudulently report a vaccine injury on the VAERS system. So we should then start looking for, well, where have been the cases where someone has reported being injured by the vaccine with a cardiac arrest or a heart attack, who has subsequently been taken to court and criminally fined or sent to jail. Well, we don't have that. That's not going on at all. So there's this huge disconnect between the assertion and then what would make sense if there really was a problem of fraudulent VAERS reporting.
Well, and even the fact that, there is a Harvard study that showed that only 1%, an estimated 1% of injuries are even recorded in VAERS, because most doctors and nurses don't even know it exists.
And in our own Canadian system, where there was, I think it's Paul Chan, but he was testifying in Red Deer, I think, when the National Citizens Inquiry was going across the country, and he was discussing working in the emergency in a hospital in Alberta, and how he would try and he would have somebody's come in, seemed to him like they've just recently been vaccinated and now they've got a heart attack or now they have a stroke, and he's trying to fill in the form online to report. And what would happen is you keep having things, the little rainbow colored circle keeps going around and around, or you go to a page and then that page doesn't exist, and then you go back. Like, it was like the system was set up to be completely dysfunctional. Right. So he would spend half an hour trying to fill out a form and couldn't even be successful in his attempt. And emergency room doctors don't have that kind of time to spend at a computer with a malfunctioning system when they got people lining up in the ER.
Yeah, I know. And, you reminded me also of Dr. Patrick Phillips' testimony, where he reported 9 injuries, was called, and 8 of them were denied. Not only that, but the Health Canada or I guess the provincial body that was going through the forms contacted those vaccine injured people to tell them that their doctor was wrong and that they should go get a booster.
Yes. Yeah. So
I mean, it's obscene.
it is. It is. So the gaslighting, I think that's a proper way to describe it. That's been going on for the last 4 years in Canada.
Yeah.
Is just horrendous.
In these times of fear and confusion, you have the power to face any challenge right at the tips of your fingers. It's one of the reasons I started Trued Up was to find out how people faced the challenges that we are facing, how they trued themselves up to their values, how they stood up, how they found the courage, how they got through whatever they needed to get through to live a life of purpose. For me, journaling has been the single most powerful tool I have found to deal with stress and anxiety and all the issues in the world and in my personal life, and to create who I'm going to be and how I'm going to face those challenges. I invite you to explore my unique approach to mining your inner wisdom and other resources in my new course, The Power of Journaling. You can rewrite your story and reprogram your life. I would love for you to join me on Saturday, March 1st. Find out more at powerofjournaling.com. I want to go back to what you said. You were talking about there's information that you only found out because you were on Twitter/X. I refuse to call it X. Yeah. Just still is Twitter for me. And it's interesting because in the spring of 2021 is when I joined, because that's where you could find the scientists. Yes. Because the information, they were sharing information. They were, discussing, debating information amongst themselves, and it was all there. So it's interesting that if you're not if you're not plugged into the new ways that people are gathering information, it's just all going to, bypass you. In the book, there's one other point about that, because I'm not scientifically literate. Mm-hmm. And you have this wonderful quote from Carl Sagan: "We've arranged a society based on science and technology in which nobody understands anything about science and technology." That is such a powerful statement. I think that, you talk about silos. We've been so siloed in terms of our interests, our education, our media, that people don't even know how to discern the information we're being given.
Yes, and we're also, anecdotally, I'll have a conversation with, I know someone who's in my circle of friends, more like a friend of a friend, who worked with BioNTech out at UBC on the Pfizer vaccine, and I hope that they just did their best and followed their orders to do whatever they were doing, and weren't in close communication with the Pfizer's worldwide safety branch that had written a report by April of 2021 that 1,223 people who'd received the vaccine by the end of February 2021 had died as a consequence of taking the vaccine. So I assume that people do their work. They go to their 9-to-5 job, and they, in this case, do a job like that, sort of do their little bit to tinker with whatever they have to do to help move the vaccine along. And then they have no idea what else is, what else is going on in the bigger picture of the pharmaceutical giant. That's my hope. Maybe they've got, like the canary in the coal mine or whatever. I don't know what, but I know other people who are doctors and nurses who, it seems to me, have they will spout the statistics coming out of the British Columbia Centre for Disease Control, showing that the vaccine adverse reactions are very, very rare, and so then someone like me goes ahead. This is not in my book. I might have it if I do a second edition, but the BC Centre for Disease Control had reported by the 25th of March of 2021 that there were, I think, 146 severe adverse reactions to the vaccine. Now, take into account that in British Columbia, anyone who received the COVID vaccine was and then got was off to hospital, or who went to a morgue because they died. Anyone who received the vaccine within the first 3 weeks and was in hospital or the morgue was counted as an unvaccinated hospitalization or an unvaccinated death. So the 144 or 146 severe adverse reactions are only the people who are counted as adverse reactions by the official body in British Columbia, who showed up finally at the hospital or in the morgue 3 weeks after vaccination and before the end of 6 weeks after vaccination. Nonetheless, the safety signal at that point was showing it was 16 times more likely to get a severe adverse reaction from the COVID vaccine than from the flu shot in British Columbia. So there was a concern. So there's this guy called Kyle, I think Nuftall, an epidemiologist with the BC Centre for Disease Control, and there's an email that he sent to his colleagues around the 3rd, maybe around, maybe more like the 8th of April, before the early April data was officially published, saying that he's going to rework the COVID data set. And then a few days later, the April 3rd, 2021 BC Centre for Disease Control data on the COVID-19 severe and adverse reactions came out. Now, a week later, from March 25th, 2021, 144, 146 severe adverse reactions. And then on April 3rd, officially, when that data came out, there were only 26 severe adverse reactions. And that happened because they decided that there were categories. Like if someone had Bell's palsy as a reaction, that was no longer considered a severe adverse reaction. So they started moving out categories that normally would be, Guillain-Barré disease, I think, was even one of them. It's quite shocking, but it's a great way to reduce the number on your data set if you move categories of reactions from severe to just adverse.
Yeah. Do you think that people are generally starting to understand that they've been lied to, or at least that it might not have been fully the truth?
I think that I think that there is a hardcore of, people who have strong emotional drivers to want to believe that the narrative we've been told, safe and effective narrative, is true. And I think that for those people, it will be very difficult for them to ever acknowledge that their perceptions of what's happened needs to be revisited. And I have friends they're still wearing masks, and they're, it's and so it's and I think because the psychological operation, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's in the States, was lamenting in the late summer of 2020 that Americans weren't frightened enough of COVID-19, and we have our own Canadian Armed Forces was involved with, as reported in the Ottawa Citizen, in tweaking things so there could be psychological drivers to get people to be vaccinated, whether that was to offer a pirate pack for children at McDonald's if you get vaccinated, or to tell people you can't keep your job if you're not vaccinated. So all manner of things.
So, you make all these great points, and I know this, many people know this, but then there's those people, as you said, who are emotionally invested in their version, in a fantasy, but in denial, let's say. Is there a way to, are we able in any way, do you think, to reach those people? Is it necessary to reach those people? What is it that needs to happen in order to move away from the direction that we have been heading? And before you answer that, I will just say, um, because both things, both COVID itself and then the invocation of the Emergencies Act have been the measures, let's say, the health measures and those measures are viewed in such completely opposite ways that for those people who think it was all okay, it's over. They don't seem to recognize that we have moved beyond democracy. You have that great quote from Naomi Wolf, and I remember when she wrote the book on the fascist shift. She said it doesn't matter whether most people believe the fake news or not. Eventually, they simply don't have access to enough good information to assess what is real and what is not. We have the information, but if people don't even know where to look, do they have access? Is there any way of shifting the narrative for the public, the general public?
So for a person who to this day is trusting, who's about ready to get their 9th booster, they're going to need to give themselves permission to question the infallible, inerrant statements of the fact checkers, which they keep going back to keep them in their, on that team, as it were.
Mhm.
They're also going to need to give themselves permission to ask questions about what's happening to people who may include their immediate family and friends. I mean, I have friends who have, one who's a retired physician, and his daughter has William-Barr disease. And he knows, she's vaccinated, and they wouldn't have it in any other way. And then she has this reaction. I asked, like, not to try and, I was more out of concern, just like how could this happen? He said, well, sometimes it's a vaccine, a reaction to a vaccine. But it was clear that I could not talk about, well, what vaccine might that have been, in 2023. But so, like, there are people who are strongly in favor of the narrative we've been told, who have family members who are having serious health issues post their vaccination, and it's I don't know whether it's willful. It's probably willful blindness. If you have been somebody, so walk down their path for a minute. If you have been someone who's been strongly encouraging everyone in your family to get vaccinated, and now you have a son or daughter, or a mother, father, or sister, brother, who now has had a stroke or some strange neurological condition which is very problematic, or so, and on and on. If you will start to allow yourself to think, well, maybe my loved one in my family is in this condition as a result of my insistence that they get this vaccine, that's really hard. That's really hard emotionally. The guilt and so on that a person might feel. They might worry about, well, if it wasn't safe for my family member, what's going to happen to me? And they've already had their 3rd booster. So, it's, I think for people in those situations, it's just a lot easier to just not even think about it. So there's a huge deterrent to wanting to revisit that, because it's going to open up a whole Pandora's box of issues. I was lied to by the prime minister that I voted for 3 times. So there's all kinds of issues.
Doctor, by the media.
Yeah.
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 But
But I think that when you talk about, I think that there is, I don't know how big. I think that there is a percentage of the general population who are beginning to have discussions beginning to say, I had a couple of doses because I was required to by my employer. But, looking back now a few years later, I didn't feel all that great about that. Just even being forced, even if they're fine health wise. So, but these conversations are slow to come because I think a lot of people have experienced over the last number of years that when they weigh into having a conversation, well, what do you think about, the protests in Ottawa, or what do you think about getting a booster? How safe and effective do you think it was? Well, very quickly, I and other people, if we have anything dissenting to say at all, get told you're not allowed to ever talk to me about that again. So we're still in that place.
We interrupt this program to talk about programming, personal programming. We are subjected to programming from so many angles today in so many ways that we don't even recognize the ways in which we limit ourselves as a result. The most effective tool I found to true myself up to what really matters is my journal. It got me through the worst years of chronic fatigue when I had no life outside of my house. I learned to tap into my inner resources and transform my relationship with external circumstances and with myself. As I was recovering, I began leading guided journaling sessions that participants found to have a profound impact in their lives. And now I'm relaunching the power of journaling as a 10-week course to guide you in mining your inner wisdom and expanding your personal power. There has never been a more important time to empower ourselves, regardless of the circumstances. I would love for you to join me on Saturday, March 1st. Find out more at powerofjournaling.com. You can rewrite your story and reprogram your life. And now, back to our program.
When I was growing up, there was a lot of studies about what happened in World War II, including what happened in Nazi Germany, and how could it be that the German people generally went on for decades, I think into the 70s or maybe even to the 80s, until you had a majority of Germans who recognized that there had been concentration camps and the people had died and all that had happened with that it wasn't just Western propaganda. But I think that when something has happened that has some really awful implications, it's just easier for people to turn the other way. So
I completely agree. And I think there's a couple of things that I want to tie together, but I think that what's required is not just more information, because the information is all out there. I think what's required is some kind of spiritual shift, some willingness to put aside our egos, to put aside what we know, in order to explore what actually happened or what's even possible. And I think this is where there's actually good news. This is where there's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to put all that aside. So I know that you were an NDP supporter. So was I. I also volunteered with Jack Layton in Toronto. So we have that in common.
Okay.
And I tend to agree with you. The left left.
Yes.
But the people who stuck with the left, with the values of the left, the values of standing for the working class, the values of free speech, the value of the right to protest, even the act of protesting, all of these things no longer are associated with the left. But the people who stuck with it based on some ideology or some dogma they have of some tribal, what's the word? Fealty, loyalty. Yeah. So,
one of the things that has emerged now as something that I had not seen so clearly, I would say that pre-pandemic, I generally had regard for my friends and colleagues who had gone to university and had degrees. And of course, when I'm meeting with them at a cocktail party or to go see a movie or a dinner out or a walk in the park, I'm not grilling them about their how they're functioning at the workplace and questioning whether or not their degree is fake or or if they bought it online. I mean, so I and so I assume that their degree represents something about ability to ask questions, ability to do research and go into one sphere of study and be competent enough to get A's or B's. Uh, and then, uh, you know, and then it turns out that many people have perhaps learned to have a long suit in something, but they're totally ill-equipped to ask big questions about all manner of other things. And it seems that the people who had the most common sense were the truck drivers, were the waiters and waitresses, were the tellers, the banks, the janitors, all of the people who didn't have the opportunity or chose not to do something else with their lives. They're the people who had the smarts.
Right. Well, maybe they're the people who are the least attached to their opinions, that they kind of take things and assess a situation as it comes. I don't know.
Yeah, I think yes, because no, if you're not, you give your opinion and you already know it's not because, oh, now I've given my opinion, I'm going to end up on a news talk show,
Yeah.
and become a celebrity and have the paparazzi following after me, to ask what I think, you know.
Yeah.
But yes, if you have climbed the ladder, you want to make sure that you're doing something that's going to please the boss, and maybe they'll give you a raise with a bonus, or you'll get a good reference
Right. And if
for
you,
the next place you go.
yeah.
And
And if sure, I'm sorry to interrupt.
so if part of that now means, oh, and by the way, you need to be vaccinated and have your third booster or all of that, you think, okay, well, I guess I'll roll up my sleeve because that's going to help get me, my golden nest egg or something.
So there's two things. One, I want to circle back to what I started to talk to you about, which is spirituality, because I see that when there is an adherence just to the attachment to material world things, right? The job, the raise, or even just the opinion, the egoic attachment to my opinion, my work. So you make a good point in that if you are an academic, for example, or if you are somebody who's worked in a particular field and you have espoused one particular line, it's much more difficult. It's not like you've just given your opinion to your friends, right? You've now made it public, or maybe it's published, who knows. And so I understand that there is more at stake in order to backtrack. What I see, and I'm curious what you think about this, especially with your background in religious studies and in spirituality, is that a missing component? And I just want to quote one short thing from your book on sacred writing. You said, in the historic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the Ten Commandments have been understood as essential guidance for creating a healthy community. Ancient societies understood the importance of telling the truth. It seems to me that that very simple wisdom is what's missing. And if people have no spiritual connection, if they have no connection to that wisdom, that deeper sense of self, then it's much easier to get caught up in not wanting to admit you were wrong.
Exactly. If we have as an anchor that we just sort of that guides us throughout the day, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, for example, then we're going to be very, very careful about describing the protesters in Ottawa as an unacceptable fringe minority or misogynists or racists or homophobic, and so on.
Mhm.
Because, well, how does the prime minister know, or how does the deputy prime minister know that this is the case, that this is an apt description of these people that they haven't even met? So we need more scrutiny, and we need to have more permission to be skeptical about the claims that people make, and we need to have an anchor to say, to be able to have a step between listening. Okay, that's what the prime minister, that's what the public safety minister has to say. Now, what do I think? What are they telling me? Who benefits from this? If this is true, who benefits from that message? Who loses? Being able to ask those kinds of questions are really important. And I think that what's happened is that we have many people. I mean, it's been the laptop class that has been especially devoted to all that's gone on the last numbers of years, and so I have to look back at something like what happened in the Archdiocese of Boston with the scandal with the priests and children. I didn't think about at the time. I would just be horrified and so on, but we have to think about, for the people who kept on, for the cardinals and the bishops and the priests and nuns and other people in key lay leadership in the Archdiocese of Boston at the time. They would want to. There would be because they're part of the Roman Catholic Church in that part of corner of the world, they would want to believe the best about their
Mhm.
fellow priests and not believe these terrible stories. And so there's a real lure to want to defend the organization you're part of. And so for the doctors and nurses who've been raised in public health, and public health in Canada has been one of the things that we often pointed to as a nation, as along with the CBC and hockey. But what makes Canada great?
Yeah.
If we're not Americans, what are we? Well, we have the CBC, we have our healthcare system, we have hockey, maybe pizza. I noticed this, that a lot of people who I know that are in these professions have no vested interest in saying, oh, my public health officer is not being honest with me. They don't want to believe that.
Yes. How do we move people, or do we? Or let me ask it another way. You obviously did the thinking. You did the introspection required in order to, change your mind politically, in order to be open to see the facts of what happened. You actually went to the inquiry. What is it that motivated you to do those things? So what I'm interested in is, I think there's a much richer life when you're trued up to your principles, your values, and are willing to let go of your opinions. Because what happens is that there's this huge smorgasbord of ideas available to you, and life is actually so much more rich. What is it that guided you to make that transition? And what is it we can encourage in others?
What guided me to fly to Ottawa from Vancouver and sit through a week of the Public Order Emergency Commission, and then eventually scroll through the transcripts of all 76 people who were witnesses, was that I was aware of a huge disconnect between what my government was telling me about the danger that the protesters posed. It didn't make sense to me, and I knew that the only way for me to know it, in a solid way myself was to have a firsthand experience of the inquiry, or so that was why I flew, because I wanted to be able to not depend on other people on the nightly news who were mediating the story. They were doing their own editing and curating of what they wanted me to know. So now I was going to be able to watch firsthand what was happening, and then I could take away what the important parts were for me.
So, what do you account, though, for the impetus to even think that way? Do you know what I mean? Like when so many people wouldn't even think to question. And I know I would have included myself in that a few years back. Something shifted, something had you question what you were seeing.
Well, I mean, I had a sense, well, something, well, I had a gut reaction or an intuitive hit when the invocation of the Emergencies Act happened. That it was, I just, it didn't pass the smell test. So, I mean, that was my own reaction. I didn't know all of why that was. I wasn't in Ottawa, although I had walked through a crowd that was having a protest and sympathy in Vancouver, downtown Vancouver, on the 5th of February of 2022, and I had stuff in my head. Are all the people protesting? Are they all white supremacists? It happened to be that was on Robson Street, and there was a stage, and the person speaking on the stage was an Indo-Canadian woman named Anita Krishna, who'd been fired from Global TV after 20 years of being news director. And she said, look around, see the variety of people here. We're a variety of people, cross section of races and colors and backgrounds. He said, what you're seeing here will not be reported on the news tonight. So, I mean, that was one of the things that began to anchor my sense that there was there was something wrong with the story we were being told.
Well, as I was reading Unjustified, it really took me back because I was at the convoy, and I wrote some stories from there, and it was, and I'm sure you've heard this many times, it was one of the greatest things I've ever experienced. It was also, as I walked down, Main Street in Ottawa at midnight on a Saturday night with my girlfriend, I have never felt more safe.
Yeah.
It was a tremendous experience, and I'm grateful to you for not just the high journalistic standard and the fact that you quote mainstream, New York Times, Washington Post, which makes it just that much more credible for the people who potentially you could reach with this information, right? You're not saying Joe's podcast said, right? Like this is like mainstream sources. But reading the stories of the people, it brought me back to all of that, to just the heart of it, the heart of people who were there, the courage, the dignity, it's just, even for that piece, it's so valuable. Is that quality something that we're losing, or did this awaken this in people and something we can grow?
Well, I think that what we need to do as citizens is we need to, if we're going to watch the news, we need to say, what am I being told here? What is the perspective of the reporter or the news anchor? And is there anything else? Where could I go to find something else? Is there another perspective? Is there another angle? I mean, so often in history, a group of people end up in the crosshairs of a news story and are scapegoated. And then we find out over and over again throughout, current events and history, oh, it didn't really happen that way, but now the damage is done, and I mean, the worst kind of things that happen are where somebody has been accused of murder, and then we find out years later that they didn't do it, and now they've 12 years in their life they've been in prison, and now they've been released, and we go, oh, sorry. And the person's putting their lives back together. But we care, as a society in Canada, we time and again carelessly leap, rush to judgment, leap to conclusions, believe the worst about this or that group or this or that individual. And yes, sometimes we're right about our assessments, but other times, time and again, we're wrong. But we as a society don't want to look at our habit. And in this case, all that happened with the convoy, there's an awful lot of a rush to catastrophizing and alarmism. I mean, the people who are senior bureaucrats testifying about the children who are at the protests, and thousands of children, I gather, depending on the day, would be there with their parents, making snow sculptures, throwing snowballs, eating samosas or chicken noodle soup in a car with an engine running to keep warm at minus 25 degrees. And yet these children are being painted as if they're, human shields, as if this was the Syrian civil war. So it's almost as though we have an archetype in our society. Chicken Little is a story about from way back in the fables where I think something falls on Chicken Little's head. I don't know what it is. I forget, a walnut, something happens, and then Chicken runs around saying the sky is falling and gets all of the other animals in the farm to get all in a tizzy and all upset. And I think that what we've allowed ourselves as a society to do in Canada is to allow some politicians and senior bureaucrats who perhaps were involved in groupthink, and that may be a charitable way to describe it, who have a penchant for not dealing with their free-floating anxiety. And the moment something comes along which represents opposition to their policies, they think the very worst about what that possibly could mean. And throughout most of Canadian history, we haven't had this kind of unglued leadership. Even in the 1930s, when there was great upset over R.B. Bennett's policies during the Great Depression, and people came from Regina and other points west all the way to Ottawa for a trek and sat down finally with the Prime Minister, and they had a very testy, rather argumentative discussion about what was going on, but at least the Prime Minister met with the protesters, and time and again throughout history we've had other people, maybe not the Prime Minister, but somebody who's delegated a cabinet minister or deputy minister who meets with some people to find out what the people protesting, what they're hoping for, the reason for their protest is. But now we've got to a place where we are so removed from face-to-face conversation in our very in the world we live in now that's so mediated and also so very virtual. We can do all kinds of things. We don't have to go to a grocery store. We can order our groceries. We don't have to go to the restaurant. We can order, DoorDash or something else, skip the dishes. So we're in a very protected kind of environment where we have less and less firsthand experiences. And as we remove ourselves from these firsthand experiences, it impedes our ability to be able to assess, to use our five senses, to know what it was like to be in the room. I mean, I have impressions of being at the Public Order Emergency Commission and noticing, there's only 6 of us in the gallery right now. This is really important. Why are there only 6 citizens in Canada that want to show up on a given day on this very important inquiry? So, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have noticed that. So
I guess the last question really is, what would you like to see come out of your book, which of course I recommend that everybody reads, but particularly Unjustified. But what would you like to see come out of what we've experienced over the last 5 years?
Well, I would like to see, I'm hoping that my book can be a catalyst for friends and family and neighbors, maybe even work colleagues, having some new conversations about what's going on. And my hope is that that conversation will continue for the next. It's going to happen. It's going to go on for a number of decades. I mean, I think that that what's gone on, that there's an awful lot of trauma that's going on for people, a lot of high affect, a lot of pent up emotions, and it's going to take some time for us. I mean, I could, my best hope would be, oh, well, everybody in Canada will have read my book by the summer, and then they'll say, oh, we were wrong about the following things, and now we know better, and but no, it's gonna take some time. It's gonna take some real soul searching, and soul searching doesn't happen easily when someone thinks there's nothing to search. But I think that some things, even what's happened yesterday with the new administration in the United States, as far as health policy, and I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Jay Bhattacharya and others going into positions in the cabinet, that there will be some new re-examining of what has gone on, and that will bubble up here in Canada too, and hopefully we'll have some. We'll also have some reason to ask questions about how we have had colleges of physicians and surgeons, for example, so stray from their core purpose to start chastising doctors, like Patrick Phillips and others, for doing their jobs. I mean, before the pandemic, if any doctor noticed that a patient of theirs was having a bad reaction to a new medical product or a new vaccine, it was an ethical responsibility to alert official bodies in their province that such and such had happened to patient X. And now we've had situations where doctors are being told, you're warning us about too many serious adverse reactions. Stop it. So we need. I think that if we can, that'd be one of my hopes, would be that a book like mine and others that are out there by Dr. Stephen Pellick and Chris Shaw and so on, can help raise awareness in the general public about the problems that have emerged, and to restore proper functioning of bodies like the colleges in the different provinces.
I know I said that was the last question. I have one more.
Okay.
And it's really the sort of the premise of this podcast. So what is it in your makeup, your life experience, your way of being, that had you feel compelled, if you felt compelled, to tell this story?
A story needs to be told when it's not being told. And so I was compelled to tell it because it was important, because I was learning that I was being told things that weren't true, that were dishonest, and that were also involved narratives that were putting people's health at risk. Not everybody's health at risk, because people have gotten vaccinated. Not every Canadian is in a health crisis, but that enough people. I mean, anecdotally, at this point, I know dozens and dozens of people in my social circle who are not doing well post vaccination, and all of these come out one at a time. But I knew that there was something really amiss with the public messaging. And if there had been other people that normally do their jobs and get on this kind of assignment, I wouldn't have felt motivated. But I was experiencing people all being in our little social bubbles, being invited to stay home, you know, wear masks by ourselves in our cars by ourselves, and all of this stuff that didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense to me that I need to wear a mask to go into a restaurant, and then once I got to my table and started having food and beverages, that the virus would take a time out and leave me alone. So so it was my ability to pay attention to what I was seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, tasting, and touching, my five senses, and my own inner wisdom about whether or not I'm being told something that's trustworthy. And my conclusion was I wasn't. And then I looked around to see who else is doing this. And I know that there are some other books that other people have written, but at the time I was writing my book, I didn't know anyone else was writing a book, even on the topic I was writing. So that's what motivated me to, to step forward to say, well, if I don't write it, maybe the book I've written will never be written by me or anyone else. So that was my decision.
Thank you for your wisdom and thank you for your work. It was a pleasure speaking with you. And of course, we'll be sharing all the resources for all your books and any upcoming dates where you're speaking in the show notes.
Wonderful. Great to speak with you, Michelle.
Thank you, Ray. Pleasure to finally see you.
Great. Bye-bye.
In my conversation with Ray McGinnis, I was interested in how someone moves from teaching journaling courses and spiritual leadership to writing about one of the most important events in Canadian history, particularly with such high journalistic standards. His answer is a simple yet profound lesson for us all. It needed to be written, and no one else was writing it. When we see something that is wanted and needed in the world, we can bemoan its absence or we can fill the gap ourselves. As many people have said repeatedly, no one is coming to save us. Ray's willingness to fill that gap led to an important historical document for all Canadians and all people who think that democracy anywhere is secure. My second major takeaway is the reminder that the left-right political divide is a false one. The supporters of the Freedom Convoy were not right-wing extremists, but in fact came from across the political spectrum. Some of the supporters I met came from the Conservative Party, and some came from the NDP and the Green Party. Ray McGinnis came from the left and found a left-leaning publication to publish his first article critical of the invocation of the Emergencies Act. If we learn nothing else from the disaster of the COVID policies, it's that those who rule us play us against each other with divide and conquer tactics. Imagine what Ottawa would have looked like if the media hadn't followed government orders to misinform the public about the greatest peaceful gathering in our history. The bonds that were created between people and provinces would have spread throughout the country, leaving ordinary citizens empowered by our ability to come together and to hold our governments accountable as the public servants they ought to be. Whether it's people's politics or medical choices, fighting each other is what distracts us from the truth. We need to examine the message rather than the messenger, to dig for and discern the truth, even and especially when it defies our assumptions and our so-called side. As long as we cling to our opinions without exploring others, our tribalism will destroy us and those who rule will profit. I am grateful to Ray McGinnis for being trued up to his values, for helping to bridge the political divide, and for writing a book for all Canadians. Thank you for joining me. I'm Michelle Leduc Catlin. Please come again to the next episode of Trued Up.